Welcome, welcome to another Sunday Satsang. What we call life or the flow of life or the experience that we call life as it flows moment after moment, day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, is designed to be an experience of duality. And we don't have to go into scriptures or concepts or beliefs to make sense of it. It really is confirmable in our immediate experience. It's either hot or cold or perfectly comfortable temperature. It either is fun or boring. And in the same way, the me and the other, this and that, here and there, inside and outside, up and down, you and me, or more accurately, me and not me. So the macro perception of the flow of life can be confirmed as a display, a manifestation of duality, of the two extreme ends, and then everything in between that might be possible. And in the micro, when the journey turns inward, if it's destined to turn inward, it is also a design of duality. It's just how it's designed. It's name of the game. When we look within, it is found that we have good qualities and bad qualities with respect to a certain benchmark in the society or in relationships or in work situation. So good and bad in with respect to, in relation to. whatever situation or event, that quality comes in play with. So when we look within, there are things, there are thoughts, there are emotions, there are beliefs, behaviors, attitudes, opinions that are good and that are not good. And another way of labeling this good and not good would be that are acceptable to me and that are not acceptable to me, that I look down upon. So if we take an example of, let's say, a smartphone, it comes with many apps, many applications that are inbuilt in it. So it is supposed to function a certain way. It is supposed to look a certain way. It is supposed to have a certain power as a processor or as a certain amount of memory in there, certain definition or quality of camera to click pictures or make videos with. Different kinds of settings that are available to the user. So a smartphone is designed exactly how it is designed. It might serve beautifully to me as a user, or it would serve horribly to me as a user, depending on what is needed for me as a user in relation to using a smartphone. So if I were to call myself a smartphone, I am designed with certain hardware characteristics, certain software characteristics, certain settings, certain features, certain characteristics, certain bugs, certain inconsistencies. If a smartphone could assess the good and the bad in itself, again, good being the useful characteristics in most of the situations that it plays in, that it comes about in, and useless being the bad, the not so useful characteristics that it is designed with. So if I or smartphone could the smartphone could assess the good and the bad and had the misunderstanding, had its system designed in a way that it came with a misunderstanding of the belief in the sense of personal doership and attachment to outcome, there would be suffering. There is suffering because if I am the doer, if I were the doer, and I believe myself choose or do the bad stuff, the useless stuff, or the pain delivering stuff to myself or to the other, I would always choose and do excel in everything that I put my mind on, put my intention on. I would always be loving. I would always be patient. I would always experience all the wonderful qualities, characteristics that are advertised as how a good person should be. And in our case, when seeking starts, that can transit into how an enlightened person should be. What it means to be enlightened gets translated into displaying and experiencing only the good stuff, the pleasurable qualities of being compassionate, being loving, being patient, being displaying wisdom, discernment, equanimity, serving to others or to life without self-centeredness. No anger, no irritation, no frustration, no, well, sometimes no fun even, because depending on what concepts we're exposed to and how they register in our system, there can be this subtle idea or belief that can build itself within the up-to-date conditioning that an enlightened person should look like this. Or it can subtly start believing that an enlightened being means a perfect person, meaning no not so good or not acceptable qualities. And at a certain point, it might strike, it might click on us that actually that's duality. When there is a priority or a clinging to this and the opposite of clinging or resistance to that, whatever it may be in life, is duality in itself. And according to a wisdom teaching, there is a concept that points that enlightenment is end of duality. And if we hear it literally, we start expecting that this sense of me and other has to dissolve. The sense of I-ness or this personal baseline that we function from in life has to dissolve. And there may very well be a phase of that for the formless self to open up to itself, where the personal baseline or the personal separate self may fall away for a bit to get to recognize what we really are. However, the end of duality is this end of inner conflict towards what arises as the content of experience, not only circumstantially out there, but also in here as a person. End of duality is simple falling away of the misunderstanding that I am the doer of whatever is going on within and without, and that I have any role to change it, including the effort that comes for it to change, or including the lack of motivation for it to change, including the success of it changing, or including the failure of it changing. So all the good stuff that we subtly think or believe to be good, and all the not so good stuff, is an impersonal arising as the design, which is labeled as genes and up-to-date conditioning in this framework. So whatever is that I experience myself as a person, if I'm short-tempered, if I'm irritable, if I'm judgmental, if I'm impatient in certain situations, if I have a low threshold of listening, if I'm not a good listener, whatever those characteristics may be, being able to find or land on a ground where it is not personal anymore. It's not my doing, whether I am a patient person or an impatient person, whether I'm a good listener or a bad listener, whatever those characteristics are, all of those design characteristics are a result of my genes, the genetic blueprint that came together when the egg and the sperm conceived this fetus that was born and now has taken on this shape and form of me, and the up-to-date conditioning, which goes on, that it's not even conscious from the moment the fetus is conceived until this point. Even these words are up-to-date conditioning. Anything and everything that comes in contact from any sense experience is up-to-date conditioning. So I am this smartphone, this gadget, this biological, impersonal design system that has the capability of experiencing not only just those characteristics, but an attitude, a perception, an interpretation of these characteristics, which might be designed as coming from a place of a belief in the sense of personal doership and attachment to outcome. So there might be a clinging and resistance to the good and the bad, defining the good and bad for ourselves personally. Or the system might be designed, or the system may evolve based on the up-to-date conditioning, landing however it is destined to land. And the good and the bad might be related to as useful and not so useful, so as good and bad, but that ownership, that sense of guilt and shame, that sense of blame and hatred towards that good or bad might be absent. And that is really what I feel to point out in this talk today. First of all, putting out a disclaimer, which goes without saying almost now, but however, it is a pointer that cannot be missed. So whatever is said, because of the use of language being a dualistic system of expression, so it has to sound like a subject and an object and then a verb and action in between. So it does sound like that someone is doing something to achieve something. However, the disclaimer is there is no doer. So whatever is being said here is not a prescription of what we should or shouldn't do, not we could or couldn't do, not of doing at all. Whatever is said here is intended just as a proposition of maybe new concepts, maybe old concepts, but just another iteration of a concept that may or may not land as up-to-date conditioning. And hence, it's a description of what may happen and not a prescription. So we can, before we start getting into the meat and potatoes of the talk, let's just sit back and relax if that's possible, if that's available, and not feel like that I need to understand this or grab this or follow upon it or reject it or understand it. Maybe I said that twice. Anyway. So let's play around with a thought experiment, taking it within ourselves, just for ourselves. Let's leave others out of this. Maybe our close relationships or what's going on in the world, our bosses, our colleagues, our friends, our enemies, our families. Maybe if it's possible, just leaving all of that aside and sitting here just with ourselves and entertaining this thought for a bit, see if it's possible or not possible, and why it might be possible, why it might not be possible. What if we were to be okay with everything that we are? What if there was nothing to correct? What if the good and the bad is exactly how I'm supposed to be? What if it's okay that I am impatient or compassionate or selfish? What if it's okay that I'm not physically as strong as my fellow beings? What if it's okay if I'm not good at, let's say, making money, or if I'm not good at relationships? What if whatever it is that I hate about myself or I can't stand about myself, or whatever situation or equation in my life that I have to feel like that, oh, this has to change. What if it was okay, truly, actually, not just as something I sugarcoat my heart with, or not as something that I just speak about in a conversation, but deep down, I'm kind of trying to convince myself that it is okay. But what if it really was okay? What if it's okay that I'm flawed and I'm not perfect and I cannot be perfect? Is that okay? What if I have more unacceptable qualities than good qualities? What if that wouldn't be a problem within myself? And when I say that, it basically means, what if I don't feel ashamed of myself? What if the sense of unworthiness or not enoughness were to go away totally, completely, without those qualities or characteristics or behaviors that unworthiness projects upon? So what if those qualities and behaviors were to remain, but the unworthiness, the sense of lack, not good enoughness itself were to fall away? What if I am worthy? I am whole, I am complete, with or without all those good qualities that I am looking to cultivate, I'm trying to find within myself. or putting so much effort every day to change. Is it possible to completely be honest with ourselves that these are my good points, these are my bad points, and from an unbiased perspective, making our peace with it, that this is how it is. It may change, it may not change, knowing that the flow of life and who I am in a certain moment is a direct result of my genes and up-to-date conditioning. So I may come across an anger management class, and if it might help me, and I may find myself in a place where it's possible to not be short-tempered in some of the situations that would trigger the anger before. And that would just be a result of genes and up-to-date conditioning evolving with that availability of circumstance. Or I may have gone to many and many classes, workshops, and still find myself short-tempered and maybe even more frustrated now because I've spent all this money and time on trying to learn how to not be short-tempered. And still I find myself the same, and now even worse because I'm angry at why it hasn't worked and all those trainers. There's a statement that says charity begins at home. And it's a beautiful statement. That's so true. We go out there and we think about what's wrong in the world and the world needs to change, and without really realizing that that just might be a trick of our suffering mechanism to project the suffering out there. Is it possible to just come back and see the conflict that is projected out there, and the world delivers the proof, the confirmation of that conflict very beautifully, because there is war and there is love and there is both the extremes available, possible, already going on in the world. But is it really possible to just come back and acknowledge the extremes within ourselves? Without blaming ourselves for being the way we are, or without feeling pride in ourselves if all we find is good. Falling away of non-acceptance of ourselves is the charity beginning at home, is already the change that can happen for the world out there that we seem to be so worried about, and inevitably so. But this falling away of non-acceptance within ourselves towards ourselves is the very change that we are looking to witness in the world. The peace of mind, the unbroken, continuous peace of mind within our own systems, within our own lives. And if that is not available as per destiny, maybe there is a possibility to be at peace with the absence of unbroken peace of mind. Is it possible to accept that I'm not at peace, that I am in conflict, that I'm not all good? This mere recognition, this very raw, sometimes painful, sometimes humbling recognition, cuts the pride within ourselves and cuts the judgment and the hatred and the resentment towards the other. And it might lead to a visibility that any discomfort or uncomfortableness with the other or with life or with the world out there is merely just a projection of the uncomfortableness with my own self. And that is the selfless self-centeredness that might be needed for the suffering to shine through, show itself, and maybe fall away also. When there's no need to project our own non-acceptance out there in a relationship, in an event, 10 years back, what happened, or what may happen in the future, or what is already going on out there in the world. When there's no need to project our own sense of unworthiness out there, it's already begun. It's just a matter of time that the suffering would fall away if it's destined. So in this thought experiment, maybe we can treat it as a game. Whenever we see thinking about what happened or what someone said or what someone didn't say or did or didn't do, we find ourselves in a loop about something that feels not acceptable in the system. Maybe we just come back and see how that it might be a projection of our own system. That is sadhana on the path of non-duality. That is the fruit of all other practices that are advised and encouraged. If those practices take place the way they are intended to, might lead the seeker or the seeking to a place where nothing out there is the problem anymore. The problem might be the inner conflict, the inner non-acceptance of the dual arising of manifestation, which is how it is exactly supposed to happen. And from a place of dissolution of this inner conflict, there might be a possibility to go out there in the world from a place of no conflict. And any effort or action or words shared from that place is the change that the world needs. There's this account in one of Ramana Maharshi's books where, and this was the time of when India was under the British rule, and there was a lot of resistance going on in India for freedom from the British rule. And it was a difficult time for the country. And Ramana, never having left in physical form, the Arunachala, the Ruvannamalai, his ashram, and there was a devotee who came to meet Ramana and ask questions and just be in his presence. And he couldn't help but ask. It's like, because Ramana would read a newspaper every day. So he was aware of the current events and whatnot. And that devotee couldn't help but ask Ramana, it's like, when the world is suffering out there, how can you just lie down on this couch all day, every day, and not help the suffering out there, not contribute to the movement or to bring about positive change in the world? And Ramana, with his beautiful smile, with his beautiful silent gaze, looked at him. And then at some point he said, how do you know that me lying on this couch is already not helping, is already not what the world needs? And maybe not in those exact words. I probably am paraphrasing. Is it possible to be free of conflict? Even practically speaking, it doesn't mean that difficulties won't arise and we don't work with things that are problematic or not efficient or not healthy. It just means that the pleasure and pain of life, including our own behaviors and emotions and feelings, also categorized as the pleasure or pain, depending on if they feel acceptable or not acceptable. So just being able to take them as pleasure and pain of life that arises in this moment as the content of experience, nothing to do with who I am. And everything to do with my genes and up-to-date conditioning. Something feels pleasurable, it's because of my genes and up-to-date conditioning. Something feels painful, it's because of my genes and up-to-date conditioning. Something feels acceptable or non-acceptable, completely because of my genes and up-to-date conditioning. How life has designed me as this mechanism of perception or experiencing itself, experiencing everything that is playing out there in relation to itself. And as that really is the place where life might be lived from. Any difficulty will be taken care of ever more so efficiently, because the energy is not seeping or wasting itself in that shame spiral, or how could this happen spiral, or how dare you, or how could I do this. I've heard Ramesh say this and Muji say this in many of their satsangs, where it's clearly said that it's not that life becomes easy, it's just that life becomes simple when there is no conflict. What can I do to be, to not be in conflict, or to be free of this inner conflict? Nothing. Just being here, listening to these concepts is enough, is more than enough. There is no need to even remember what was said or what was heard. It is not my job to be free of conflict, but it is possible for the conflict to fall away for a moment, as a phase, or in an unbroken, continuous manifestation. So really, there's nothing to do. Because the doing happens exactly as it happens in each moment through us. And sometimes even we are surprised that, oh, where did that come from? If only life could show us that, oh, where is everything coming from? I may get a phone call from a friend. We might be talking, and they suggest, oh, this is where you are. This city has an amazing sushi place. And that lands in my system. And then after the call, I remember, oh, let's try that sushi place. And that thought is grabbed onto. My husband agrees to it, or or he's not at home. And then I'm like, okay, I'm gonna eat sushi. That happens, and then the phone works, and I call, and I have enough money, and the restaurant's open, and they are delivering, and they are able to bring sushi to my place. I get the sushi in front of me. And even then, you never know whether you'll get to eat it or not. Maybe there's an insect in there, or maybe that sounds really gross. But there might be, let's say, an earthquake and I have to run out, or my drink falls on the sushi and now it's not edible. Who knows what happens? So, really, do I ever know how is anything ever happening? Conceptually, yes. It would be actually very ignorant of us to say that I really don't know how it all happens. If you're sitting in a group of people and talking about, let's say, holding a cup. So yes, I raise my hand, I go to the cup, I make a grip on the cup, and I hold it. There it is. So conceptually speaking, that's what's going on. But really, do I actually know that what created the impulse of even using this as an example? It appears out of nowhere, and it's grabbed onto, or it is let go of, or it sometimes doesn't even register in the conscious perception or conscious mind. And we find ourselves taking action on it. And that action may have the desired consequence or not the desired consequence, and sometimes opposite of what we desired, or maybe sometimes much more than what was expected. So the outcome of that action or intention or words is unpredictable until it is here. Yes, we can say that in this manifestation, there is a design to everything, or a pattern to everything, or the law of cause and effect functioning accurately so. And yet, what stops the cause and effect to act differently? What if the air were to become visible, or it would start raining bananas from the next monsoon season and not water droplets? What if I wake up tomorrow morning and I don't remember the past? That is a possibility. In each moment, life is arising spontaneously, unpredictably, with a seeming pattern following the law of cause and effect. Either way can be confirmed that it is my doing. So the arising of shame, the arising of blame, the arising of pride, the arising of worry, anxiety, the arising of expectations from myself, from the other, from the flow of life, the arising of attachment to outcome of how it should have been, how it shouldn't have been, is not needed. It just doesn't make sense anymore. So it may still arise out of habit and out of the residue that is still in the system. And yet, it just doesn't make sense. The energy of getting caught up into it, believing in it, is spared. That energy is free from it. It is like an old tape recorder playing the music that I don't relate to anymore, that I don't like anymore, that I've grown out of. So who cares if that music is still playing? I don't need to pay attention to that. If I'm still finding that there is this attitude of clinging to making it stop, that it shouldn't play at all. Well, that's attachment to outcome right there. So that itself is suffering, not the playing of the tape recorder, but the need for the tape recorder to not play anymore is the non-acceptance. And that's when maybe we can truly come home to ourselves. And when someone else says, oh, you're such an impatient person, you get irritated so fast, you're good for nothing, there might be an agreement, actually, because I've seen and there's a peace with myself, and the non-acceptance is absent. When the other points it out, it's not offensive anymore. The need to defend ourselves doesn't have to be there. Because, yeah, I know I am impatient, right? I'm sorry if that makes your life tough. And that's it. End of the conversation. No need to blame, no need for shame. And even the other might be surprised, like, oh, I meant it as an insult, and they just laughed it off. But who cares? Because that would be their suffering. Nothing to do. No need to change. Not that we have a choice. We feel like we have a choice, and we spend all our days and every moment rehearsing of how we should be or contemplating of how we shouldn't have been. What can we do different next time? And all of that is useful when it comes to practical situations. But if it's coming from a place of not good enough and attachment to outcome, that only if this were change, I'll be okay, life will be okay. Well, sure, if I were able to make enough money, I would be able to pay my bills. So I need to work on that. And I do work on that, or I don't work on that. But any of that defining whether I'm complete or not just doesn't make sense anymore. Because what I am is within which even the personal self, with its good and bad points, and the world out there is arising. What I am is already all there is. What if all the musical instruments were expected to make the same rhythm, same sound, same chords? It would be pretty boring, wouldn't it? What would be the point of so many musical instruments then? How would we make melodies, beat, and rhythm, and bass and treble, and the taste of the spectrum of melody? Wouldn't be possible if all the music instruments were the same or sounded the same. So let's enjoy the imperfection that is already perfect, exactly as it is, unique and ever evolving, ever changing, whether it seems to or not. Because whether we like it or not, our up-to-date conditioning is always going on. Even when I choose to reject something or not take something in, that's up-to-date conditioning taking place without a doer. That's enough from me. If there is anyone who would like to talk, share something, please feel free to raise your electronic hand and I would open the floor. Ranko.
Hi, Gulin. How are you?
Hello. Very good. How are you?
Very good also. Yeah, very interesting topic about duality and how we feel about ourselves. So for me, it seems worthy to see this sense of unworthiness. So it is probably a belief that we are conditioned by our parents, by our society, by our environment during our life to feel unworthy. And we are trained to feel that way. We are trained by pain, actually, by psychological pain. And sometimes it's very, very hard when you are trained like that, by the pain, to see what is really actually going on. And also what is interesting in that belief, that we somehow see that this belief is somehow useful for us. So how it can be useful? And we think that it can be useful because if I feel unworthy, I will try my best to feel worthy, to improve myself, to be somehow better. And that seems very noble goal. So I'm starting to do that. But actually, is it useful? In my experience, at one point in my life, I was like very much depressed because I couldn't meet my expectations from my society, from my parents and things like that. But at the same time, life put in front of me something which I was actually very good at. But I couldn't accept it because this belief was already very deeply ingrained. I couldn't really accept it. I started doing that, but I didn't do it with full measure, full passion. It was always behind me. So it took me probably 30 years to understand that at the end, that actually it's not useful. So what determines actually usefulness? It's life. It's life itself. I will show you, okay, this is useful for you, and not just for you, but all people around you. So your idea, what is useful and what is not useful, that is actually worthy of considering. And you really have to see that. You have to just go through that psychological pain, At one point, it will be just clear that this pain is also not something which helps in any way. That is just the way we are trained, actually. Like they train horses, they put something in their mouth and they pull the strain and they feel the pain. So in that way, they cannot really resist. So we are in the same way we are trained. In that pain, we cannot really understand what is going on. It took a lot of time, actually, and took really life to show us this belief. So in that point, I think that's a very interesting belief to see. Is it really useful and is it accurate?
Yes, yes. That is such a beautiful sharing, Renko. And whether we feel alone in this or not, it's inevitable on the seeking journey to feel like we're a misfit. Or we in one form or another find ourselves on a path where there has to be enough courage to let go of or to disappoint the existing expectations of the current relationships or even our own older expectations of how our life should look or how we should be, what we should like, what we should not like. There seems to be a phase, a path that inevitably encourages us or sometimes even forces us to let go of it. And that is the beginning, maybe, of understanding that what is useful, what is not. So who says I need to be in a corporate job to be happy? Maybe to be successful, but actually not even to be successful, because there are many other ways to be successful. But that avenue would open up only if the belief that if I'm not doing this, I will not be successful. Or if I'm not doing this, I won't be acceptable by my parents. Or if I'm not doing this, my wife would or my husband would leave me. So all of these beliefs that we live with and act as a fear mechanism because we are fearing to lose. So we are living life not from a place of looking to be happy. We're just living life from a place of fearing to lose what is here. And we might reach a place where we may find ourselves asking that what I'm afraid of losing, is it even worth keeping? And not to say that relationships are not worth keeping, that's not my point, but really, let's take a job here, for example. So is it worth pinning myself down to do a job that makes me miserable for 8 hours a day? And the money is not even good enough. The people, I don't enjoy their company, and I literally am miserable 1/3 of my life like this. And that already, we call it in the outer world midlife crisis or quarter life crisis or whatnot. But really, just coming to a place where we can see our attachment to the fear of losing. And if we can embrace that fear that, yeah, I am afraid of losing this, and there might be an opening to see that, oh, there are other ways to be financially successful. And the fear can fall away. And our own expectation of ourselves can show up that, oh, we were always trained to believe that this is the only way. Again, taking the job as an example. However, when you shared the point of that inevitably we as humans, as babies, as toddlers are trained to be good boys and good girls and obedient boys and obedient girls. It is inevitable in the design of life to to find ourselves with this deep-rooted belief in sense of personal doership, that I need to be good in order to not be punished by my parents, or I need to be good so they would approve of me or hug me or spend time with me. And at that point, what is clear is that in our society today, the parents are not, well, they themselves were trained like that. And then we can go back as many generations as we can go back. And at the beginning, maybe of the generations, it was just about survival. So you better behave like this to survive, otherwise you'll get killed. And that kind of upbringing or training methodology has followed. However, in today's world, we are very blessed that we more often than not would not get killed. So there's no need to be afraid all the time, like before, like maybe thousands of years back, or maybe even hundreds of years back. We won't go hungry, or the chances more often than not. So, but inevitably, because we don't know any other way, the parents are trained to follow the upbringing to make us functional in society, to make us acceptable in society, and not to be happy. So the goal is not to be happy or to not be suffering, but the goal is to be socially acceptable and functional. So we don't fall behind, because falling behind would be the equivalent of getting killed in that caveman analogy. So if you fall behind in society, that means you're eaten by the bear in the forest days. So all good intentions, and that is why there is a phase when we realize that, oh, I wasted 20 years of my life, or 30 years of my life, or 50 years of my life following something that wasn't even true, that wasn't even useful or applicable. But then we do have to realize that there's no one to blame. That's literally how life is. And if it weren't for those wasted 20, 30, 50 years, I wouldn't be able to enjoy this recognition in this moment. So how would I know what it feels to be in the sun if there were no night? So the contrast of misunderstanding has to be there, which motivates a movement towards the misunderstanding falling away. And before it falls away, it has to become visible in all its might. So yes, you are very, very accurate when you say it is useful to come to a place where all our beliefs can be seen, or some of them can be seen, and can come on like a weighing scale of whether it's useful, but to what benchmark. And that benchmark, rather than being acceptable or being lovable or being worthy, becomes to the end of suffering. The benchmark becomes peace of mind. The benchmark may become happiness. And when that happens, it's already, the dominoes has started falling. So there's really no turning back.
Yeah. Also, unworthiness is just not existent, actually. There is no such thing as unworthiness. There is no also such thing as worthiness. We can't
Yes.
put labels on it. And
Yes.
it is what it is. That's it. But it takes time to really understand that, because this conditioning is very powerful, actually.
Yes.
And probably at the end, what will undo this conditioning is that amount of pain that we experience. And at one point, it has to be like clear that what is happening is not optimal. Too much pain. Why is there too much pain?
Yes.
Something is wrong. Something is not fitting.
Yes. Yes. It's beautiful that you mentioned that worthiness doesn't exist, and so does unworthiness.
Yeah.
The idea of worthiness is there to show the illusion that is the idea of unworthiness. So, yes, because unworthiness seems to be real, and when it is here in our experience, it is real. There is no denying it. So the idea of worthiness has to come into play as the antidote to that unworthiness. And yet, the worthiness really is just the absence of unworthiness arising. Just like peace of mind is the absence of suffering arising. And once that is understood, really there is no interest in entertaining anything that comes from a place of incompleteness or unworthiness, now that we're using that label. There is this certain smell or, a flavor to the experience of unworthiness. It may have a different costume, a different story, totally unrelated to the previous ones. And yet there is this pattern, that flavor that is with it, where you, with the cultivation of discernment within the system, just knows that this is icky, this is suffering. And there need not be a question that whether it's coming from the psychological suffering or whether it's coming from biological preference, because there's a flavor to it. And we only ask that question because we don't want to hear that it's suffering, mostly. So even if that question is arising, means it's probably suffering. So yeah, and when that flavor is not yummy enough, there's just no interest. Of like, okay, you're coming, like you're telling me to eat that ice cream, but yeah, I know I'm allergic to ice cream. And when the allergic reaction is painful enough, the momentary pleasure or reward of eating that ice cream is just not worth it anymore. So yeah, that's literally unworthiness showing up as an illusion. So tempting, and yet at a certain point it'll be like, not worth it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ranko. Thank you for sharing. And we can talk about this sense of lack or unworthiness that is deeper than the conscious faculty, even. It is so unconscious that there is no access to it until it maybe starts showing up bit by bit by bit, or however it is destined to show up in our journey, in our seeking journey. There are many concepts, accurate concepts, or mythological concepts that attempt to explain where this sense of unworthiness comes from. It can be called a byproduct of this attempt of consciousness splitting to be identified with a separate body-mind organism, the separate being. So mythologically speaking, when we use the words of soul and God, so when the soul was separated from God for embodiment, for a physical or subtle embodiment, that separation in itself creates a lack, a sense of void, a sense of unworthiness, let's use that word, into the soul that is separating from the bigger whole. And at the point of birth, we can say, so when the baby who's comfortably just floating around, no need to breathe, no need to eat, nothing is needed, is probably maybe peacefully hanging around in the womb, in mother's womb, and is provided for, is not separate from the mother's experience of reality. And at a certain point, it has to be thrown out of the womb. That's just the process of life. And the baby in itself doesn't have the cognition power to make sense of what's going on. It's just a catastrophe, a life-ending apocalypse going on in its home, which is the womb, and it is being pushed out very painfully into somewhere which it has no idea what it is. So that in itself may create a sense of unworthiness, of lack, where there would be this inherent sense of that I'm not good enough. And that's why I was thrown out in the world. So in some wisdom teachings, they point out this as a concept that birth is suffering, life is suffering. So the very event of birth itself might be the cause of that deep-rooted inherent sense of unworthiness, that sense of lack, where it wasn't even consciously processed as that, but it was just set into the system in a way that I wasn't good enough to stay in the womb, when that actually wasn't the case. And then over the years, when the toddler is brought up, the reward and punishment kind of upbringing that we as parents are trained to perform deepens and solidifies that idea of that I need to be a certain way to be worthy, which means I'm already as I am, I'm not worthy. And then that internal voice, which we can call the superego or the internal critic or the inner parent, that is always kind of analyzing and judging each and every thought, each and every arising within our system, is the conflict itself. And that goes unnoticed, sometimes all our life. And sometimes we are able to become and do everything that inner critic or inner parent, that conditioned superego expected from the body-mind organism. Sometimes life happens in a certain way that we end up becoming exactly the version of ourselves that was expected of us from that superego. And we realize that, oh, it still sucks. It's not delivering what we thought it would deliver. And that is when the house of cards that was so solidified as a belief that this is exactly how it should be for life to be okay. The house is built, it is solid, and it's still not okay. And then the house may crumble by itself, or we may go on a journey to find a hammer to break that house down. Or maybe that house doesn't even need to break down. It's just that I still live in the house, but I don't attach my sense of self to that house of cards anymore. So however that journey unfolds is destiny unfolding. Not my doing. Not my parents' doing. not the society is doing. It's just how life is designed. For life, for life's experience to be exactly as it is. For me to be exactly as I am. For the world to be exactly as it is. It just is. And before I go on a journey, a revolution to start attempting to make a change in the world, let's just come back and recognize, become an acquaintance to the conflict that already exists within us. Maybe it is possible to make that the project of the revolution that we so much need as a purpose of our life. Maybe that's the purpose of life for now. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for your time. I love you all. Until next Sunday.